Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what's up, dude?
Not too much, buddy. Today we're going to be chatting about the petition for Canada to seek withdrawal from the UN. A recent study that found our food is not safe, finding 100% of tested items linked to health problems across all ages. And then the tensions escalating in the Middle East, as well as the January 6th Capitol riots and what's going on currently with that, and Trump being removed from ballots and Biden's latest speech on the matter. So before we get into it, if you wouldn't mind heading over to blendernews.com to sign up for our newsletter, that would be great. And all right, let's talk some shit. All right, so we've got a petition seeking Canada's withdrawal from the UN, which has sparked a political firestorm. Over 71,000 signatures so far. This was sponsored by the Conservative MP Leslyn Lewis, and she has faced sharp criticism from Liberal ministers since doing so. The petition, closing on February 7th, outlines concerns about Canada's involvement with the UN and its agencies, including the World Health Organization. Petitioners oppose the obligations and initiatives associated with the UN, particularly Agenda 2030 and its Sustainable Development Goals. They argue these programs compromise national sovereignty and individual autonomy due to their rapid implementation, perceived lack of transparency, and potential impact on cultural values and privacy rights. So what's your thoughts there? Do you think it's a plan of action that Canada should take in order to pull out from the UN, or do you think the UN still serves a purpose?
I don't think it serves a purpose whatsoever. I mean, the reality is none of these global organizations seem to. I'm not really sure they really serve much of a purpose ever. I mean, I'd have to do more research. I shouldn't say that. But you know, one of the questions I ask is, what was the last great thing the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, or the United Nations did for our country specifically? I'm not saying they're not doing things in other parts of the world that might be helpful. I believe there's always some sort of motive behind it, to be honest with you, at that level. But when you look at what they've done for Canada, it's next to nothing. You know what I mean? And if anything, like I see it sort of as a amplified version of Western ideology for the most part. And what I mean by that is, you basically have all the cooks in the kitchen that run all these countries. They go there and they kind of use the UN as a megaphone to now implement these more harmful ideologies. You know, they've got, like, for example, the UN is championing the global disinformation bills. So that happened a couple months ago, and it was actually a bill that came out of Canada and the Netherlands, I believe. And their whole idea was, look, disinformation's wild and crazy, and we all have to get together and we have to stop this. So all the countries, you know, I think there's 35 nations that have signed it now. And they all go back to their country, and then they start implementing policy based on these rules. But basically what you're saying is now you have a world government, right? And then, you know, you look at the WHO, their pandemic response was horrible. And now they have complete control. Now there's the idea, or there's this veil of they have complete control over how all these other countries need to behave for the next pandemic. And it's like, look, you said this the other day. You can't even take advice from a prime minister and spread that throughout the country because each province lives a different way. There are different needs. So how could one organization, one guy, basically, I know it's more than one guy, but it's one guy talking and I really don't like his face. How can you have one organization telling you how the whole world needs to manage this crisis? When in some places, like, was it Sweden?
Sweden.
Yeah, like they had basically no pandemic measures, and they turned out better than everywhere else. You know, or even Florida in the States, you know what I mean? I think Texas was very similar. And these are just in little pockets. Like, you can't have one organization tell the rest of the world how they have to manage a situation, especially when it's varying in terms of its severity. It makes no sense at all. You know, and then with the World Economic Forum, I mean, these guys are just gangsters. It's actually kind of funny. Like, they're just trying to take over the world in the most nefarious ways. There's no way we should be involved with them in any way whatsoever.
You can't even distinguish between the WEF and the UN anymore because they've openly signed on and have a legal agreement to push forward with the Agenda 2030 and what the WEF calls as the Great Reset. It's the same agenda. But they've openly signed on that, yeah, they're working together on this. So I see no difference between those two organizations now. And what's crazy about that is the concept of fascism itself, it's a word that gets tossed around way too much these days, and most people
Don't know what it means.
most people make a false correlation between authoritarianism and fascism, where fascism, yes, there's the obvious authoritarian aspect, but fascism is the merger of political and economic power. And so when you look at this, you go, okay, there's the UN, which is supposed the political power side, and the WEF, which is the representing the economic power.
Yep.
And it's like these two things coming together is fascism. And it's like I try not to. I don't like using that word because it's become meaningless with its overuse now.
Yeah, it's
but
like using the word authentic. It's
yeah,
all right, man.
yeah,
Sure,
yeah.
dude.
Yeah, but to me, I can't make a distinction between the two anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem that I have is I think that we are so entrenched or embedded in these organizations that there's really no easy way out,
Mhm.
right? For example, and I don't think this is just an example I'll use because it's very recent, is, in the most recent, I'm not sure which bill it was in the United States, but they implemented a NATO clause to basically stop Trump from being able to pull out of NATO. So now if you want to pull out of NATO and you're the US, you need 2/3 of the Senate support, and you need to give them at least 6 months heads up. And you'll never get it because you'll never have 2/3 of the Senate be Republican or Democratic. There's just no way. It's always going to be 1 or 2 votes. That's what it's going to be, right? So, there's basically saying, hey, we're putting in safeguards now into our legislation that you can't get through this. So you can't get out of the organization even if you want to. Now, I don't think things like that exist, particularly for like the UN and the WHO. But I imagine that there are other ways that the government apparatus does something like that, but it's just not as obvious. You know what I mean? Like you try to pull out, but there is all these stopgap measures, whatever it's going to be in your way from you actually being able to pull away from it, But at the end of the day, like I said, like, can you think of anything good they've done for us?
To me, I look at it as a useless organization at this point that's just an overbloated bureaucracy. There's 40,000 UN employees.
Wow.
And the function of the UN, if you were to say there is one, would be to essentially act as a mediator between nations all around the world. It's your circle table
Yeah.
that you can all sit down and have a chat at. It's like you're telling
I
me,
call them a guidance counselor.
yeah, and
It's
it's
kinda
like,
what it is.
It's like you need 40,000 employees to do that.
Yeah.
And then too, also from like a military perspective, it's like the UN used to obviously have its peacekeepers, which now I start to view as very Orwellian.
Yeah.
It's like the Iranian morality police.
That's exactly
It's
what
like,
it is, dude. It's like,
but to me, it's the UN is pretty much useless at this point.
Yeah, I guess I don't really. What I would say is, if you look at the most recent actions of the UN, I think it's a good example. So there's been a lot of back and forth in the Israel-Hamas war,
Mhm.
right? And there's all these diplomatic arguments about the U.S. not supporting it or this or that or whatever. But here's the reality: it doesn't even matter if everyone supports it. There's no one has to listen to them.
Mhm.
They're not the rule of law in a sense, right? They're just there to try to. That's what I'm saying. They're just basically there to try to implement like harmful policy and harmful ideology at scale around the world. And these countries decide if they want to listen to or not. And if they do listen to it, they're like, well, the UN said. So like your country being Trudeau can say, well, the UN said we have to put in disinformation. Guys, this isn't even me. I'm not the bad guy. I'm trying to save truth. This is what the UN said. All the countries are doing it. But then, so you know what I mean? You use it as like this, you use it as sort of a filter to work through when you're trying to implement these totalitarian fucking measures. Or you just don't listen. Like Israel's like, oh, how about fuck off? So we're going to do this anyway. So to me, it's basically just, it's become a weapon that the political elite can use to implement these larger scale, like I said, harmful tools that really don't serve us in any way.
Well, I made a video the other day talking about how it's not just Western nations that weaponize the UN. The UN's been captured by some of the most oppressive and authoritarian regimes on the planet. Like I was talking about how the Islamic Cooperation Organization is the largest voting bloc in the UN. So when things go to a vote in the UN, the Islamic nations, like the Irans, the Saudi Arabias, all of this that have the Pakistans that have just a litany of human rights violations, they're the ones sitting down and condemning, say, Israel. And I'm not saying that Israel isn't, I'm sure they have many things that in the past that they've been, that should be condemned from a human rights perspective. But the fact that these are the people that are making that judgment, to me, it just renders it invalid. And then also, like, the craziest one is North Korea was appointed the head of council on disarmament.
Yeah, what?
And you're like, yeah, okay, this is the nation that's currently, that always is firing rockets off
Yeah.
at South Korea, and then has been pursuing a nuclear arsenal for decades.
Yeah.
It's just, it's a joke. And
Yeah, no, I agree. I think
even too,
but-
actually, one thing like to point out is that China never gets any human rights violations. That's the amount of capture that has happened in this organization,
Right.
where Israel gets like over hundreds,
Yeah.
which again, sure, maybe is valid, but the fact that China has none when they currently have 1.5 million Uyghurs locked up in concentration camps, they've killed over 1.5 million Tibetans since the 1950s. Like, where is any of this coming through the UN or any condemnation or bad press or China?
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
yeah.
It's all basically a charade. It's just at scale. You know what I mean? Like I say, all these organizations all these organizations are captured via some sort of political ideology, for money or for power. It doesn't take your pick. It doesn't matter. But I mean, like, they wouldn't even, like, I don't want to get too deep into the Taiwan, China, what the name of the country is thing, but the UN wouldn't even recognize Taiwan, wouldn't even say Taiwan as a country because China's got so much capture over the organization. Like, obviously it's polluted.
Well, that's even the official U.S. stance as well, that Taiwan is still part of China. It's one of those things where they just don't want to piss them off as well. But yeah, to your point, it's just captured. And I even just have an issue with the concept of, what we were talking about with the top-down ruling approach is, I've said this before, but like the smartest person is still ignorant of 99.9% of knowledge and truth.
Right.
And so it's like you need as many decision-making data points in making any movement forward as to what would be progress. The idea of getting one organization or a very small group of people to sit down and then go, okay, we know what's best for everybody. It's just
It's absolutely insane.
The amount of opportunities for that to go completely haywire. And I mean, now you see them talking about stuff like the head of the WHO was just on there saying how we need to stop and cut back on agriculture, attack the farmers like they're currently doing in Germany, all this kind of stuff. And I mean, they're doing it here too. But it's like the idea that some dude on the other side of the world can tell us in Canada what we should be doing for our agricultural practices. It's like, go fuck yourself.
Well, it makes no sense, right? So they're doing it from like an environmental perspective, not realizing, okay, what is its contribution to our economy? How many people does it feed? How significant is this so that the rest of Canada continues to operate effectively or efficiently in any way, shape, or form, which it doesn't really. But yeah, exactly. Like you when you're in the thick of things, when you live in this country, when you're maybe the prime minister, then down to the premier, and then your municipal government, they understand the ramifications of all these movements. And the further away you get, the less you know about every single thing that you're doing. So when you try to make these decisions from the top down like that, looking at the whole world, there's actually no way that it's an effective form of governance at all, right? So for me, I think it would be wise for us to get out. Unfortunately, I don't see it happening anytime soon. The one thing that I would maybe, say is maybe the one road I could see us going down, rather, where I could see this maybe ending in the next 10 to 20 years is because of the East-West divide. Because, you're looking at this BRICS development. I think if BRICS develops a lot over the next 10, 15, 20 years, you might see these countries separate in more ways than just economics. They'll separate politically, they're obviously militarily. And so the UN might be one of those things that falls where you kind of have your own separate East UN, West UN, or whatever it is. I still think it's bad to see these organizations, one for each side of the world. I still think that's terrible, but I think that's the only way I would see us pulling out or getting out of it anytime soon, and then sort of reorganizing ourselves from there.
For sure. And something to keep in mind going into the next topic here is that these organizations are the same ones that have slapped the safe labels on. And actually, well, to the Europeans' credit, they're not as willy-nilly with some of what we're about to talk about. But our food is not safe. The plastic chemicals found in 100% of tested items linked to health problems across all ages. So Consumer Reports tested 85 popular foods and found widespread contamination in every single item. They were all contaminated with plasticizers, which are chemicals and plastics linked to diabetes, heart disease, infertility, autism, and more. Some examples of highly contaminated food are beverages like iced tea, Coca-Cola, Poland spring water, lots of canned food, condiments, dairy, obviously fast food, cheap refined grains, instant food, microwavable dinners and such, a lot of over-processed meat and poultry, infant food, packaged food and vegetables, prepared meals, and seafood. So my thought here is it's like these organizations, whether it be the WHO, the FDAs, the Canada Health Services, whatever, all of these organizations, they're the ones that let these things through the cracks, and they sign off on them. They give people a false sense of security of being like, oh yeah, we've done the research and this is all good. And then you look into the fact that the companies which are all very guilty of this, of contamination in their products, they're the ones that fund all of these organizations and have control of it. So it's like a regulatory control problem. But yeah, so what's your thoughts on them finding 100% of tested items being contaminated?
Well, I think it was sort of, I think they knew they would find it in 100% of the items. I think we know that in any processed foods, like hyper processed foods, there's going to be these phthalates and these other plastics and stuff, plastic chemicals, I should say, in them. So I don't think that's a huge surprise. What alarms me, like you said, is how they're allowed in there. It's this regulatory capture thing. You know, you look at Health Canada, you look at the FDA, and these organizations were built with the sole purpose of safeguarding Canadians, right? And this is what they allow in. And you know, it's funny. Like one of the things I wrote, and I said, like, we want you to be able to push back and go talk to your political leaders in your cities and in your areas, and try to get these people to do something about this. But don't put too many eggs in that basket, because the reality is they're the reason we got here in the first place. And so for me, it made me feel like this. It made me feel like there's nobody here to save you. That's how I actually felt. So when I was writing this the other day, I almost changed the title to that. I'm like, no, that's a little desolate. Like, chill the fuck out. But I was just like, everywhere you look, they're against you. And I'm not even trying to be hyperbolic. Like, point in a direction that the government's got control over something when they're not trying to, in one way or another, harm you. And whether they're trying to harm you or they're harming you based on some sort of bribe, because that's what it seems to be for the most part. I don't think they're really that nefarious. But this is the ramifications of it. Like, it's in baby food. What are we doing here? You know what I mean? And the things that it causes, from autism, ADHD, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hormone disruptions, childhood development issues, obesity, obviously. I mean, reproductive problems and even cancers. And you kind of go, well, that's pretty much all of it. Mm-hmm. You're saying that you're allowing stuff in our foods that kill us completely. It's hard for me. And, you know, you want to talk about how these regulatory agencies behave. I mean, if you look down at the FDA, I've got a good story about the FDA. So how they work in the States when it comes to big pharma, and I know it's the same for food, big food, and I call it big, I don't know what else to call it, big food, you know, big grocers, whatever you want to call them. So the FDA, they will go to all these small let's call them mom and pop shops. You know what I mean? The people that are doing their own small scale operations, not maybe companies that are not being traded publicly kind of thing, right? They will show up unannounced. They will show up every 4 to 6 months, maybe 8 months at your door. They're there for 2 weeks. They go through everything in your building, everything. They are there with a microscope. But, you know, if they're going to go after one of the big pharma companies, they have to give them several weeks' notice. And they often, now these big pharma companies farm them out and they have them over in like India. So they go, okay, cool. We'll be there in, you know, a few weeks in India. Take the time you need to get ready for us. They can't just pop in anymore. And they are where all the problems are coming from. Like there was the other day, there was that incident with the eye drops. Like all these FDA-approved facilities and FDA-approved companies, hundreds of different kinds of eye drops were contaminated. It happens all the time with these things. I'm not even going to get into the fucking...
25% of products, pharma products that get approved by the FDA end up getting recalled.
Exactly. So these agencies, I think we have to come to the understanding, and I think a lot of people know this, they're not here for us. They are captured. When the FDA, like, around 50% of its budget is funded by big pharma, but like 75% of their I'm gonna say like prescription drug arm. I know there's a better term for it. I apologize. That 75% of that's covered by these big pharma companies. They're completely captured. It's the same way here. Like the things that they're allowing happen. Like there was something in that article that basically said this is actually not over top of the acceptable level. These are not they don't exceed legal limits. However, now they're doing new studies saying, well, your science is old because now just at the safe level, we're still getting people with high blood pressure and reproductive problems. So none of this is good for us. It should be outlawed in our food. At least they're doing it in Europe. They don't seem to be doing it here. So the big question is like, what can you do? That's kind of how I'm like, okay, well then you have to take ultimate personal responsibility.
Yeah.
And I
And
think
that's one of the biggest things I've said with this, because you know, people, they'll say that the solution to it is to reform the regulatory bodies, and you go, it's it's so far beyond reform. You can't just go in there, put it in a new piece of legislation, and all of a sudden these regulatory bodies are going to be acting exactly as they're supposed to.
A really good example of that is that this so the BPA was the product that they banned, right? But now they have these biphenyls. So it's basically the exact same. So they're just like, all right, we won't use that exact one thing. So regulatory came in, they're like, BPA specifically you can't use. Make a small tweak to it, even though it still kills everybody. Now that one's okay. Now, how many years is it going to take for us to put a regulation in place to stop that one? I don't see anything in the pipeline, and it's been a decade. So yeah, exactly. Like they find a workaround and they continue down the same path.
And that's where my solution to something like that would be, yeah, look at who you're supporting. Go to your local, you know, it's crazy to me because people will say that they can't afford to eat well. And if you eat well with the proper volume, like you're not stuffing your fucking face every single meal, first of all, your cost goes down dramatically if you're eating proper portions. But then second, if I go to Grace Meat Market up by College in Bathurst area there, and their prices are as good as any grocery store. And you can see that you walk in, they've got their shelf of meat that's prepared, and you can see right behind one door is they're doing all of the butchering. And it's like, there's no like crazy, and dude, even the taste of the products is like, you're like, this is night and day difference. It's not sitting in some styrofoam container for 3 days wrapped in plastic. Like, so your vote with your dollar goes way further than pressuring. And I'm not saying not to call your local representatives in government and pressure them on these kind of things, like take all action you want, but where you put your dollar will go a lot further. Like if you just start starving these, you know, say the Maple Ridge of Canada and whatever the equivalent is down in the States, the Monsantos, blah, blah, blah. If you just start starving them of your dollar there, they would be forced to rethink their strategy. But then on the other side of it as well, I do think the industrialization of food is kind of a double-edged sword, because for the first time in human history, hunger is a political problem, not a resource problem.
Right.
And so to me, I think about it and go, you know what, maybe the industrialization of food is a good thing. Like if you took somebody from hundreds of years ago and explained to them that the poor people today are now dying from overeating, then like nobody would believe you. They would call you fucking insane. So it's maybe something that should be there and accessible to make sure that, you know, we're not starving en masse. But then anybody and everybody that is capable of putting themselves into a position where they can adopt a little bit of personal responsibility, I think should do something along those lines.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of big things you can do that make a huge difference. One, obviously, is stop shopping in the middle of the grocery store. Just shop on the outsides. Like, I mean, pretty much everything you need when you go into your produce, your vegetables, your meat, all that other stuff, that's pretty much all on the outside of most grocery stores. And all these foods that were tested, they were pretty much all, I believe everything was something that was sort of hyper.
In a box or in a freezer.
Yeah, and I know you're going to have that. So, I mean, you can make that adjustment. The thing is, it can be challenging. I get it, but then that goes a long way. The other thing, like you said, is just sort of going to local shops when you can and buying in other places, going to farms when you can get out of the city, going to farmers markets. Like these things do help. The problem with that, though, is that there's capture within the, like, first of all, that's not scaled well enough. So it's like a great idea for those people that can get out there and afford to and have the time and, you know, the means, let's say. But the reality is, I don't think any more than 5 to 10% of the market, that would probably be its cap. Would you think that would be about it? Yeah.
I remember hearing some stat, and I don't know how accurate it is, but I heard some stat as to if like organic farmers and small farmers could capture up to 16% of the market. So a lot more than they're currently doing. It was somewhere in that neighborhood, but that all of a sudden the at that point is when the large grocers, the Monsantos of the world, would all of a sudden be in serious problem and have to adjust.
Right. So, so my next point then was, even though these are things we want to be able to do, we're going to come up against another roadblock. And that roadblock is going to be like the Monsantos with all the legislation they have in place about their seeds. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you have that problem. And then when you look at...
We should elaborate on how fucked up that is, because it's actually wild, their whole seed patents and stuff.
It's insane.
It's like, so you can't patent anything that is natural for obvious reasons. So what they do is they modify the organisms like GMOs with the seeds, and then they can patent those because now it's a product they've created. And if their seeds from, say, a Monsanto field go over into a neighboring farm,
Which happens all the time,
just from wind, from animals picking them up, dispersing them, all of this kind of stuff. If Monsanto finds their grains or their GMO seeds on your property, they can sue you the fuck out of you.
It's wild. You basically become an arm of Monsanto
Yeah.
after that, because you have one of two choices: lose everything, or now you work for us for 50%.
It's so crazy.
It's fucking mental, dude. Yeah, it's so you look at things like that, and then you also consider, okay, well, let's take the grocery store, for example. We know there's only a few big grocery stores, grocery owner, like big grocery in Canada. That's all there is, right? And the thing is, they're all like, it doesn't matter what they say. It's all about bottom line. That's the game they're playing, right? And they're like, oh, razor thin margins. So they're buying products from people that are treating the animals poorly, that are not managing the vegetables well, that are spraying them with everything you can imagine. When you're shopping on kind of like the outside of the grocery store, you still have to deal with all of these other things that are being put into your food no matter what.
Mhm.
And this is kind of where this is why I feel a little bit lost about this. It's like, there's no one here to save you. It's tough. Like, you know, like where Meg and I are moving next is going to be big enough where we can farm some of our own food.
Dude, my 5 to 10 year plan is to have my production company is called Homestead Productions.
There
The
you
goal
go.
is to have it on a homestead in the near future, where you can actually greenhouse, grow your own food, have your own chickens.
That's what they say.
Maybe
Chickens are the
raise-
gateway.
Yeah,
Like, chickens are the gateway
to consumer.
Eat one good egg and that's it, man. You're growing your own food. You're making your own baby food. You're
But
not
even
going
to
to
that point, it's
hospitals.
like my sister back home. She used, or I think actually no, she still does have a lot of chickens. And dude, it's the same thing. Like when you go buy your meat at a grocer, you realize that these aren't even comparable items.
No.
Like you crack a natural egg in a pan, and you're like, this is cooking differently. It's a completely different color. Like what the fuck is going on in
Yeah,
that
dude.
thing?
That actually worries me. I wonder, I'm sure people know a lot more about this than you and I do, but I wonder why the difference in the color of the eggs is so stark.
I think it's probably due to over sanitization, because it's the same reason that if you go to that, and then also the conditions that the chickens are kept in. If you look at like major factory farms,
Yeah.
it's like there's no way that those chickens themselves are healthy. So
No.
the idea that they're going to
Produce healthy
produce
eggs.
healthy eggs is just
It's
ridiculous.
just a crazy difference. But you know what they started doing? So some of these big farms that are farming chickens that way, and sort of the less humane way, they're dyeing the yolk of the eggs.
Oh fuck!
No, but here's the problem. So they're dyeing the yolk of these eggs, but it's fucking people's eyes up. It's making people go blind. Like, it's giving them all sorts of problems because people are like, oh, people want orange eggs. We can do that. So now it's creating this other huge problem because enough people want sort of a natural product.
And
It's just crazy.
One that I was told, I've yet to fact check this, so maybe fact check me on it before espousing it like I am publicly. But I heard that the free range title on chickens can actually be done by putting the chickens still never leave a cage, but if they're on a tractor bed or being pulled around in an open field, that's considered free range.
I would not be surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. That seems like a big lift for a title.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I don't know. You know, it seems like a lot of work to get that. But there's free run and free range. I forget which ones. I always buy the ones that are more expensive and that are orange.
Yeah.
I just forget which one it is because Meg and I will both kind of do the shopping, so I'm not sure. But yeah, that's just kind of wild. But I mean, at the end of the day, look, like, this problem's been here. It is here. It's going to continue to be a problem. And if we implement measures, they've already thought of the next 5 moves that we're going to make. So all you can really do is take as much responsibility for yourself and your food as possible. I think as soon as you can start growing your own food, I think you're in better shape. I really do. Or, finding a good community farm to go buy from. You know what I mean? A lot of these places do stay organic. They do take good care of their animals. It is a more humane way to eat and to buy. If you can afford to, I think that's great. I think one of the other big things too, honestly, is get the hell off tap water as soon as you can.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's crazy now. Even the bottled water is a problem. But I mean, there's all these little things. But at the end of the day, like, I'll say this. I believe humans are resilient.
Or put a reverse osmosis in your tap water. It's like you can get them off of Amazon for $250 and you just install them.
Some of those are decent, but I'd kind of kept off by saying this. Like, I think humans are resilient, and I think that we can put up with a lot of crap. We can find a way to adapt. So I don't think this is a death sentence. I just think it's something we have to be aware of. And because we know how this apparatus works, I think we need to do things for our own health and safety, and for our families and friends and anybody else we care about, to try to correct course for ourselves, because at scale, this is not a problem we can solve right now.
Yeah. No, it is. Yeah, it's beyond fucked. All right, so moving on here. Tensions are escalating in the Middle East as fighting spreads beyond Gaza. So Hezbollah and Israel have traded cross-border fire, with Hezbollah claiming responsibility for launching 62 rockets towards an Israeli airbase, also claiming direct hits. This is their initial response to the Hamas leader's death. Israel confirmed rocket attacks and retaliated with airstrikes targeting Hezbollah fighters and military sites. Both sides have reported casualties. And then we've also got the Iraqi government announcing plans to initiate the process of expelling the U.S.-led international military coalition from the country after a strike that killed the commander of a pro-Iran militia, who the Iraqi leader says their support is relied on. And then we've also got ISIS kicking off. They recently claimed responsibility for an attack, and they also are making calls worldwide to kill Jews wherever you find them. That'll probably get us off of YouTube right there. I'm just quoting, but anyways.
We'll find a way around that.
But anyways, yeah, the tensions in all those countries, as we knew it would, are starting to escalate, and it seems like it's reaching a boiling point before we see just full-out kinetic warfare between a bunch of different parties over there.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it looks like they're trying to drum up this. They're trying to turn this into a world war. It just seems like no matter what, like as soon as things start to calm down, something wild continues to happen. And something actually happened the other day that struck me as a bit of a concern. So Israel's now fighting this war, call it on two fronts, but they're not really fighting a war in Gaza. They're just killing them. Like, they're not losing many of their own troops. It's, I don't see why they need to use so many of their resources to fight that war, but that's fine because they've got a reasonable sized army, right? But now that they're fighting this war against the Hezbollah on their northern border, the U.S. says that they can't win. The U.S. says they can't beat Hezbollah. Now, I don't know the size of that militia. It is a terrorist group, it's fine. But I'm calling it a militia for lack of a better term. I don't know the size of it, so I'm not sure. I can't really yay or nay what the U.S. is saying. But I'll tell you why that gives me a concern. You have the U.S. supporting Israel, and I know that there's a lot of countries that are pushing back against their tactics right now, but they're still allied or aligned with Israel, right? Maybe not in every decision they're making, but if they start losing this war to Lebanon, and the U.S. is now priming us, saying they're not going to be able to manage these guys, what happens?
That's what I was saying.
The West dives into this war very fast.
Sounds like the U.S. is starting to kind of prep the idea that their intervention may be needed.
That's what it seems like to me. And then you look at stuff like ISIS is honestly like the epitome of terrorism. That is horrible. They're attacking both sides. Like that is, I'm not going to repeat it because I don't want to get canceled twice on YouTube. But for them to go at both sides in that horrific attack in Iran, like, what the fuck is wrong with you people? That is so terrible. But all it does is create more tension. And now is interesting. Iraq has been pretty amenable to having the U.S.-led coalition troops in there for quite a while. They seem to be okay with it. And, I'm not sure that they're doing it begrudgingly or not. I imagine
after a decade of getting absolutely demolished by them, I think they've finally just turned it over.
But you find a way to make it work, is what I'm saying. What I mean is, you find a way. They seem as though they found a way to make peace with it, even though they need support from Iran. They found a way to make peace with that. But them to kick them out, I think again, I think that escalates. I think it turns into a much bigger problem because of that. I think you're going to have this whole like, hey, you're kicking us out, and I think you're just going to see these guys now fighting them a lot more. I think Iran is really pushing a lot of buttons over there. Obviously they weren't pushing the ISIS buttons. That was just something that just caused a lot of shit. But yeah, I think in reality is I just see this boiling over. Then you throw in what's happening in the Red Sea, with the Houthi rebels from Yemen. That's getting wild. Like Iran just sent a warship in there the other day to the Red Sea. Now you got ships from, I think there's 20 or 22 allied nations that are pushing back from the U.S. that are saying, hey, like this is the organization we're now using. I forget the name of it. To push back or to fight any of these Houthi rebels. And they killed a few boats of them the other day. So that escalated tensions. And then Iran sends their warship in, right? And the Houthi rebels basically say, we're not stopping. They're continuing to attack, which is affecting shipping rates. All these major companies aren't going through there. It's affecting oil prices. This is slowly turning into an absolute fucking mess outside of Israel and Palestine. And it's getting to this point now where I'm like, it's happening slowly, but I think we're getting really close to a full-out hot war there that's going to be involved. Like, there's going to be a dozen countries involved, like, overnight.
Well, what I find so crazy about it from a cultural perspective, because I look at everything coming back as like, how does it affect us? How does it affect our day-to-day? And the reality is that a war between a lot of these parties over there doesn't affect us too much other than the perspectives and what happens on a cultural basis here.
Right.
And so like what I find most intriguing about all of this is that as soon as another party, the Israelis, the Jewish, got involved, all of a sudden everyone was up in arms about Muslims being killed. Rightfully so. I'm against the very concept of governments, let alone war. But it seems like all of a sudden there was this heightened emotionality about it. All of a sudden it becomes a very oppressor versus oppressed narrative.
Yep.
But then those exact same people, you mention how the Saudis have killed almost 400,000 people in Yemen over the last few years in their war. Silence. They don't even know that happened. And we're talking about that's 20x the amount of civilian deaths, or I think that actually includes military as well.
Yeah, but still. That's 20x the amount of casualties, and people aren't even aware of it, much less care about it. And you're like, okay, so when it's a Muslim nation killing a Muslim nation, nobody gives a fuck. But as soon as it's a Western party coming basically,
in,
then all of a protected class.
Then all of a sudden the race, the religion narratives get put in. And I actually do think that this is a religious war. It's impossible not.
Of course it is.
It's impossible to take the religious aspect out of it. And two, when it comes to, I think America's foreign policy in the Middle East has been disastrous for decades. Like it's terrible. I don't think they should have gone in the first place, but I think you're also not giving any credit to the idea that a lot of these nations, whether it be Lebanon, whether it be with Yemen with the Houthis, or whether it be Syria, Gaza, any of these, if you don't understand that these countries are being led by Islamic fundamentalists, where a large portion of their ideology and their belief system is that Islam will conquer the world, it's the last religion, it should be the only religion, I don't even see how you can properly have a take on these issues if you're just trying to make it seem like, oh, this is merely the West being bullies once again. And you're like, yeah, that is definitely an aspect of it. But if you're also not aware of the other religious aspect for Islamic fundamentalists,
right,
the idea that all of a sudden it's like, okay, you just lay down your guns and there'll be peace. It's like, that is also not a reliable solution.
No, I think it's important to understand where the other side is coming from and what they're capable of.
Mm-hmm.
I do. I think the big problem that a lot of people had was how far is too far when it comes to Israel and Palestine. But like you said, like as this continues to go and boil over, it makes me believe that this was a more coordinated effort from the beginning. It makes me believe that some form of, like you said, sort of Islamic fundamentalist group, and it may go even further behind. It may get outside of the Arab nations, to be quite honest with you. It might go into the Eastern Bloc of, the Russias and the Chinas, maybe. But But it appears as though they had a plan, and their plan was to keep this war going, because now that it looks like, even as Gaza, Israel was pulling thousands of troops out of Gaza. That's what they did recently. Like it was within the last week. You're still seeing the Houthi rebels fighting in the Red Sea. You're still seeing now Lebanon fighting, the Hezbollah fighting with Israel. No one's willing to let this go right now. And I imagine there's many chapters to the current book that they're writing, and I don't think you and I are privy to all of it, obviously. But I think it's important, like you said, to understand where these people are coming from and what they're capable of and what their long-term goals are. Because, look, I don't want to see anybody lose their lives, especially innocent civilians. That's hard. I agree. But I do think that a lot of people that are supporting, it's a lot of the young kids, not people that are protesting for peace, but the people that are sort of supporting Hamas and think that, that what they're doing is okay. I don't think they understand those things.
No.
I don't think they realize what these people are capable of. Like, especially when you have people from like your LGBT community supporting them. I'm like, do you guys realize how they would treat you? Like you'd like, and it's interesting that it does get caught up in this whole like, oh, the West is bad. They're the bad guy here. It's like, look, they're both bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
They are. But I guess you have to decide, like, if push comes to shove, who do you want to win?
Well, okay. So, and then also, this is where I was saying about how it affects us. So, from a cultural perspective, every single weekend you see protests that are hard to characterize as community building. Like, you look at what was declared as terrorism in Ottawa, which was bouncy castles and sing-along songs and all of this kind of stuff.
Wild.
And then every weekend I can hear them while in my room. I can hear chants of these protests that are happening in the name of Palestine. And dude, they're calling for intifada, which is Islamic revolution.
Yeah.
And so
yeah.
and you're like, I'm sitting there hearing this. And so playing with the idea of, okay, what was the goal? And this was kind of my take on how Israel has fucked up, not from I mean, there's definitely a case to be made that the reaction has gone far beyond what would be deemed acceptable. However, I think the Israelis fucked up in the sense where I think they played into the hand of what Hamas and the greater Islamic world wanted, was poke the bear and then have the bear overreact, throw a camera on that, and now we can essentially mobilize. Like, we've been, for decades, we've been pretty much indiscriminately letting people in from the Middle East. Now we're even seeing people, our own government, start supporting the idea of bringing in refugees from Gaza.
They are
directly.
They are.
Oh,
Hundreds.
they just are.
They're going
okay.
to. Yeah, that's they're working on it now.
So
they've already allowed all these.
And then you
people
look back at what the Osama bin Laden records as to what his essentially game plan was, what went viral on TikTok and all of this kind of stuff, was conquering the Western worlds without having to fire a bullet of their own. So, okay, you get a lot of people that are very extremely sympathetic to your cause, to the point that they would call for intifada and violence and resistance against Western nations. You ship them over there in the form of immigrants and refugees, and then essentially you, even if they were never like your quote unquote like sleeper cell as far as like somebody with these intentions, but they have these emotions, and then that you're like, okay, poke the Israeli bear, make it this be a massive issue of Muslim resistance, and then all of a sudden you can start weaponizing the people that you have put into these foreign countries.
That's exactly what's happening.
And that's exactly what I see is happening.
Yeah,
so
I agree though. I want to point out, like, I don't think these people are sleeper cells. Mm-hmm. I don't think these people are bad people. I think they're having some bad moments. But I agree, like, they're brought up in this culture and this is what they're taught. Then they go to Canada to have a better life, if that's the idea, even though it's not that great here, but that's the idea. But then when you shake that cultural belief and you start breaking it down from this side over there, like, you already, it's very simple psychology. You know how they're going to behave. You don't know how extreme they're going to be, but you also know when you put more of them together in a group, you get this mob mentality. And now, like you said, you can hear them every weekend from your house.
Well, and so I'm a big, I will argue for individualism, like till I die, and so I don't see people as their group identity, despite a lot of them seeing themselves as such. But I do think that, they're, to your point, not that all of these people are violent or quote unquote sleeper cells per se, but let's say that even 5% of the people that are in these protests would be willing to get violent if the mob went there. We're talking about a level of people, and to be honest, I think it's higher than 5% of the people. Like, you look at there was a video that came out yesterday. I'll post it on Blendr today, but about it was down at the Nathan Phillips Square of the elderly couple essentially saying like, hey, we're like, from what I gather from the video, because it is obviously hard to make out, but the elderly people were telling the protesters like, hey, I think you're working against your cause by trying to block families from having a peaceful skate on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
Telling them that while you're skating, bombs are dropping, essentially putting them at responsibility for what's happening over there. And then all of a sudden, these protesters were telling these elderly people to go fuck themselves,
That
calling
they're
them terrorists,
Yeah.
this and that, sitting there and saying, our resistance is justified. Terrorist acts are justified because it's resistance. And then to even say like, hey, I think you're working against your own cause right now, but that's terrorism. You're like, and so I look at this and I go like, it's hard for me to feel anything other than their plan is working. And I've said before, I don't think there's a win situation here. There's only a lesser of losses for the West, because if Israel wins and a lot of these protesters go violent here, that will definitely work against the West. But then if Israel loses, then they will be emboldened and go, well, us doing what we've been doing got the results we wanted.
It was effective.
More of it.
Yeah.
And so I don't see a way that this works.
No, I mean, for me,
West.
like when you look at the number of, Arabs right now, I believe the numbers are 495 million. I'm close. And it's interesting when you look at the country of Israel and then Palestine, you look at around the world, I believe there's about 16 million Jews, and there's only 14 million Palestinians. Now, I think the majority of the Palestinians, at least half and half, are in Israel and Palestine right now. That's not a massive population when you look at the whole world. But like you said, they found a way to instigate something by Hamas doing this attack and then poking the bear and watching what the bear did, that now you've ignited this war. I think it's actually going better than they had anticipated. I think what they thought, they go, well, we're going to start this by poking the bear, and then we're going to piss off almost 500 million Arabs, and they're going to be pissed off around the world. They're going to start protesting, and we're going to see how our little plan worked out. And I think it's really effective. I mean, it's broken down Harvard, MIT, UPenn. These, like you said, there's protests all over the world for this. But what's interesting is somehow, and I think this was by dumb luck, honestly, they penetrated the left. They penetrated the left in the Western world, and now they're all sympathetic to their cause. So now, like that 500 million, it doubles or triples in size. You know what I mean? Because now you're looking at, and I know that not all those people are jumping in or being involved. But what I mean is the small percentage of people that are it continues to scale. It gets exponential because you've convinced the Democrats in the West to be sympathetic to this and join them in all of these protests and stuff. I honestly believe that they're doing better than they had anticipated, but I almost see this as two phases now that we're talking about it out loud. I think phase one is almost complete, where they're like, okay, let's poke the bear, let's get them to overreact, and then let's see how this mobilizes and motivates people around the world. That's done. Now, for some reason, because now that to me, that's goal accomplished. You look like the victim, and they can do all these crazy things like harass elderly people at Nathan Phillips Square, and people are like, yeah, that's okay. No, it's not. It's fucking horrible. You guys are being horrible, right? But now it's kind of this phase two, because if Lebanon continues fighting Israel, and all these Iran-backed militias, the Houthi rebels, they're now affecting. Now you're affecting global shipping. Now you're affecting oil prices. Now you're bringing it. Now Lebanon's attacking Israel. So they go very quickly from having the sympathy to then being the aggressor. And I got to wonder, what does that look like? What is the game plan for chapter 2?
I think you just nailed it. Is as soon as they actually go on the offensive, they'll have the sympathy of a lot of people in the West, especially our like leaders, or even the people that you see at Harvard and all of this kind of stuff, calling these acts, if they go on the offensive, then they'll say, well, it's just justified resistance, and so they essentially will get a clean slate at doing whatever they see. And that's, so I you know what, I actually don't think it's a mistake at all that they've or a luck scenario on their end that they've captured the modern leftists with those beliefs. I think they've weaponized our idea of tolerance against us. You know, even it's
Man, you
like
think they're that? You think they're that sophisticated to understand the inner working? Because
the
how do
top of
think so?
yeah.
I just don't know how you motivate. How do you motivate these mobs? Like for me, I feel like the left wing sort of woke mob is this. I think like Indiana Jones. It's this fucking ball rolling down a hill. You know what I mean? All you can try to do is nudge it one way or the other, but you can't really control
All
it.
you have to do is instill in that mob, and it's actually extremely easy. Just propagandize one side of the group as oppressor and the other as oppressed, and all of a sudden that mob will do its own. They're so brainwashed with that idea that the world can easily be split into oppressor versus oppressive
Yeah.
or oppressed, that as long as you just tell them who those oppressors and oppressed are, they'll take it and run with it.
I see. I think they got lucky because if you look at the Jewish community and how integrated they are in a lot of the media, in a lot of the entertainment, a lot of the ways that we communicate, and they are considered a protected class pretty much since, if not before, at least since World War II. So I'm surprised that this was so effective because when you look at that, when you consider that aspect of it, how did they penetrate that?
But see, I don't think. But see, I think you can make a good argument that, say, for instance, a lot of those institutions created the monster that they're now fighting against.
Of course, they did.
So it's, you know, they created these. The ADL has been on it since day one about, you know, the white supremacy narratives of the West is extremely evil and uniquely racist, all of these kind of concepts that have come through these universities and organizations. I just don't think that they saw it ever being weaponized against them in return. And then now they're sitting there and it's like it's like Frankenstein. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I've lost control of this.
Yeah, that's it. But see, because of that, so here's my point. Because the organization that created it lost control, so you think that is the person who's got the most power over the group is the one that created it, right? Yet somehow the Islamic fundamentalists were able to supersede or get in the way and then be the new, you know, they're now in control, and they were able to move this mob in that way. We haven't been able to move the mob from a conservative perspective at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yet somehow these guys were able to. That's why I'm kind of like,
because the oppressor narrative is Western, anything white, anything European of origin is the oppressor.
Yeah, see, I still think it was dumb luck. I still think a lot of it was.
I don't.
You know why too?
Yeah.
I'll tell you another reason why is because. Do you think that a lot of people that are Arab are Democrats, or do you think that a lot of people that are Arab are conservatives?
So people don't realize this, but going back into the Cold War era,
Yeah.
the Palestinians were essentially under the influence of the Soviet Union.
Right. Okay.
So they were very socialist in leaning, very communist in
That's
leaning.
back then. You realize the problems back then. You're not going
Yeah.
to carry through with that nonsense as you get older. People that leave those places go, "Fuck that! I don't want to be like that." It's hard to say. Like maybe I don't know. Like I hear your point, and I don't disagree with you. I just think it was. I'm trying to use that as a proxy to help one of our arguments, one way or the other, because I don't know which way it is.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's like, hey, a lot more of the Arab nation are Democratic, whatever this is here. You know, they're liberals or they're Democrats in the United States and Canada. Then maybe that does lean more towards your point. If they're not, on the other hand, because they don't really like the way that this country is being run anymore, then it would lean to the other side. So I don't know. I was just trying to use that as kind of a tiebreaker because I see both sides for sure. But I just feel like a certain amount of it was dumb luck.
I don't think it's necessarily that they themselves are democratic. I think it's that they see that they're going to be able to manipulate the democratic side easier with the principles and virtues of tolerance and inclusion and all of this kind of stuff, whereas the right typically has a more firm ground in values, which can be rooted into a lot of Christianity. So I think for them, if they just look at who they can manipulate, who they can start pushing, then it's like, oh, we have this group who prides themselves on just being tolerant of anybody and anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've also got this group that says, no, we think there is a moral way to live life.
Yeah.
We think we have our own belief structure.
Yep. Yeah, fair enough. And I was going to just say, too, a lot of the kids is an important word there. A lot of these kids that are protesting and acting violent, like Back to that old saying, if you're under 30 and not a Democrat, you have no heart. If you're over 30 and not a Republican, you have no brain. These kids are all under 30.
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, they probably just fall into that group of influence sort of on their own. It just happens by proxy at that
Yeah.
age. So
I just think they're propaganda. I think a lot of these groups overseas, especially like China, and you know that China is completely on board with all of this kind of the stuff that's happening on the Middle East.
No, and that was actually why I said that originally.
I think they're just propaganda experts.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was saying, like, originally, like, I think that this could get outside the Arab nations. I think this could be, more of an Eastern Bloc move where you've got, in some fashion, Russia and or China involved in sort of orchestrating, manipulating, providing guidance, propaganda, whatever it is, and saying, hey, here's what we know and here's how we know this will work. At a high level, I would not be at all surprised. You know what I mean? So,
yeah,
I don't know. I'm, again, kind of to wrap this up, things look like they're spilling over. I think there's a second chapter to this war, and I think we're getting very, very close to it.
Me too, unfortunately. All right, so last up here, the January 6th Capitol riots. So we just had the anniversary of the Capitol riots. 3 years have passed, yet the fate of American democracy still appears to rest precariously on its shoulders. Here's how the events are unfolding on the infamous anniversary. So the U.S. Supreme Court is preparing to rule on former President Trump's eligibility for the 2024 presidential election. And Biden is also putting out speeches. It seems like he's making a large part of his platform for running this year as just being the alternative to Donald Trump. So in a fiery speech marking the third anniversary, President Biden warned that Donald Trump's potential 2024 candidacy posed a grave threat to American democracy. And he drew parallels between the current political climate and the Continental Army's hardships during the Revolutionary War, arguing that the 2024 would be a defining moment for American democracy. What's your thoughts on everything that's unfolding with the January 6th?
I find it a little frustrating. I was listening to someone the other day who knows this topic a lot better than I do. And he said, in the next couple months, and it happens sooner, you're going to start seeing this rhetoric around Confederates. You're going to start seeing this Union versus Confederate thing. You're going to start seeing this whole, they're going to start drumming up these old wars to try to pigeonhole or to frame Donald Trump as the bad guy that's trying to break the country apart. My feeling remains the same. Democracy is allowing people to choose. That's what it is. By saying when you select someone, you're breaking down democracy, you yourself are being anti-democratic. It's the institution, the systems in place that are much bigger than the one man, the president, that allow this to be a democracy or a republic. So when you say these things, it's actually just inflammatory bullshit. And I don't really expect anything more from these guys at this point, because this election, like I said, this election is not about merit. This election is not even about smearing the other guy. This election is about weaponizing the DOJ and other three-letter, organizations to try to get the other person behind bars. This has gotten really, really bad. And seeing how they're going to approach this as, vote in Donald Trump when you're starting the next civil war, I'm not at all surprised, but it's fucking bullshit. It's the same thing with them trying to kick him off the ballot. First, look, we've been over this, but this is now going to the Supreme Court because a couple of states are trying to get him off the ballot. I think this is a 9-0 in the Supreme Court, maybe an 8-1 because someone wants to hold out. That's what I think. I think this thing has got no chance for a couple of reasons. Look, if you do this, you are going to demolish the facade of democracy in America. If you do this and try to keep Trump off the ballot, you will start a civil war. That would be fucking wild. Also, I think it's important to note he's not been convicted of any crimes in relation to January 6th. So there's not even really a leg to stand on. It's really a big stretch on, the 14th Amendment. That's my feeling.
So I was actually watching a debate between Alex Jones and Destiny, who I think Destiny is probably the best of the left. He's a phenomenal debater too. He comes to debates and he's got his I's dotted and T's crossed. He knows what he's bringing out, and he was making a good argument about how obviously he was arguing against Trump, but he was making a good argument about how when the 14th Amendment was enacted and when they were using it, a lot of these people weren't criminally convicted of insurrection while they were in the original days of the 14th Amendment after the Civil War. They were keeping people out of office without criminal charges on insurrection. The actual policy or legislation of what would be criminally convicted as insurrection came way later. It wasn't even a thing at that time.
Sure.
So in the 14th Amendment, it doesn't actually say that it needs to be a criminal charge. So there's that. And then I think there is a case to be made that whether it be from not necessarily from Trump trying to weaponize the crowd, because I think if you even to this day you can go back and look at his Twitter feed, and one of the main posts he said at that point was like, "We're the party of law and order. You need to be peaceful." So it's hard to say that he was trying to weaponize and mobilize that crowd, but you can make a insurrection case on the idea of him trying to inject himself into the electoral process and say stop certain counts and all of this kind of stuff. And he was pressuring pretty hard with that in places like Georgia. So anyways, he laid out a good argument, at least. Whether that's the truth everyone should take away, that's up to them to figure out. But to me, what I think about is it's like, I put out I responded to one of Biden's tweets the other day.
That was good.
That, he was like, you can't be pro-America and pro-insurrection. And it's like, how was America created? It was created by an insurrection. So like, you're like, there's almost nothing more American than insurrection.
Yeah.
And I'm not calling
I'm
not calling for one or saying I'm supporting violence against the government at this point. But the whole case against it, like, what if the Second Amendment isn't there to be used against a tyrannical government, then what's its purpose? Like, it was put there for a reason. So this idea of like the whole American project was to avoid having a tyrannical government and putting the necessary measures in place that if a tyrannical government rises, that the people can fight back about
Right.
it, that they have the ability to do so. So I sit here and look and I go, and again, I'm not making this case. I'm still trying to figure this stuff out on a day-to-day basis. I don't have hard opinions one way or another, but I look at it and go, everybody just sits back and throws their hands up in the air and goes like, oh, insurrection, that's never a good thing. And you're like, well, if a government got oppressive enough or authoritarian
happens all
enough,
the time.
I think it's necessary.
Well, we do it. We even, like, in the U.S. has even instigated them. Like, take the Euromaidan in Ukraine in 2014. They instigate this shit.
Yeah.
But here would be my counter to that. When the law was first implemented after their civil war, there was a civil war.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily have to be like, well, that guy got charged, but this guy didn't, or that. It's like, you're on that side, and you just lost the fucking war. So yeah, I think it's a little different than
For sure.
than a protest at the Capitol. Here's the other thing. Honestly, this was not an insurrection. There was no, like, I'm sorry, I don't agree with that it was an insurrection. I think that's such a strong word to use. Like,
well, by definition, the insurrection is an act or an instance of open revolt against civil authority or a constituted government.
that's a very broad term.
It
that
is.
can be manipulated very easy.
And that's the
what I
thing.
guess. Okay, so my interpretation, which now I'm being the guy interpreting things maybe a little loosely, but for me, it's there was no system in place from these people to actually overthrow the government.
Mm-hmm.
That was not the intention. They didn't have the tools. They had no way to actually accomplish that goal. That, to me, this was a protest that went awry. So this is how I see it. For you to call it an insurrection, I think you're sort of weaponizing the word a little bit.
Sure.
Because, like I said, there was no plan. There was no deeply organized group of people that were like, we're going to go in, we're going to get this guy, we're going to kill this guy, we're going to cut his head off, and then this guy's going to be in charge. We're going to kick all these people out of the Senate and all these other, like, this is how we're going to do. You had a bunch of clowns at protesting at the Capitol that got let into the building.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you actually had. So I really think that, you've said this before, I think that the Democrats orchestrated this a lot more than people would like to admit. And I think that the idea of insurrection is being hung onto and sort of weaponized against Trump. I don't like Trump. I don't think he should be the president, but I don't think what they're doing is right. And I think the Supreme Court is going to strike this down, like I said. I don't see a strong enough argument to support that. I think if anybody's being, like, actually reasonably centered on this, I think they're going to see it the same way. And then when you consider what this looks like to the American people, if they do this to Trump, what do you think this is going to do? He is right now the number one candidate for president in 2024, right? He is. He's beating Biden in all the polls. There's no one in the
Beating them with Hispanics, with youth, like all
Right.
these groups that would be typically Democrat.
That's right. And there's nobody in the Republican caucus that can beat him either. So he's the number one guy. So if the left, who's in power, uses their apparatus and their tools to get the number one guy kicked off the ballot, What do you think? That is totalitarian. What do you think happens? Especially when it's a stretch, in my opinion, on the 14th Amendment, and when I think it's a stretch on what they should consider an insurrection. So for me, I hear your point, and I actually appreciate it because it makes me sort of think twice about being so black and white about this. But I still feel strongly that this goes that way for those reasons.
And yeah, don't get me wrong. I definitely don't take the stance that Destiny has taken, but I think he is like I was saying, the best that the opposite side has to offer on these arguments and stuff. But and I like to listen to him to check my own blind spots on a lot of things. But yeah, to your point, I also think the whole idea that Trump is going to be the savior of America is quite bullshit.
It's insane.
Even just a lot of his sycophants of thinking that he is essentially Jesus reincarnated.
Dude, did you see his thing? What he said the other day?
What?
God made Trump.
Oh,
I mean, I guess if God's real and he is kind of everybody's a part of God, he makes everybody, I guess. But what a fucking asshole statement to make.
Yeah. But then
Bro.
even too, it's like it's so crazy to me that a lot of the Trump sycophants and followers, they still think of him as the antithesis and the antidote to a lot of the authoritarianism and corruption. And you're like, the fact that Trump still sits here to this day and says he's proud of Operation Warp Speed, like that should be enough for you to make question being like,
Well, the problem that I have, so there's a couple things I'd add. First, how do you guys not see that he's a fucking egomaniac?
Yeah.
The guy's in it for himself. That's what he's here for. Look at his track record. Look at his history. Look at the things he said and the things he's done. He does not care about anybody but himself. That is 100% accurate. So based on, like, I just don't know why people aren't identifying that. The other thing is there's no one man that can make that big a difference. There just isn't. There's no self-destruct button. That doesn't exist. Yeah. Well, but you know what I mean? Like, you see the things that Vivek Ramaswamy's saying right now too. He won't get in because he's saying, I'm going to break down all these organizations. Get rid of the FBI. Get rid of this. Get rid of that. The apparatus is bigger than the individual. These people won't let it happen. Like you and I have said, America has a 50-year plan so they can keep up with Russia and China. They're not going to let some guy get in and fuck it up. And if he gets in and does fuck it up enough, they're just going to take him out. It's going to be that simple. And they'll blame it on another country and they'll go start another war and they'll just make more money through their industrial complex that way, military industrial complex that way. But one thing I want to mention, which is interesting about sort of this whole Supreme Court case and keeping him off the ballots, when he was kept off the ballot in Colorado, they had a workaround. They have a workaround, like they do like a town hall meeting where they don't hold a regular primary. Right. So even if someone should fact check me on this, but that what I'm saying about what Colorado is accurate. So if there's a workaround in Colorado where they can do a town hall meeting where it's a vote thing instead to just avoid a primary, that the traditional way, like that is their system, can't they just do this in all 50 states?
Yeah.
And you already know what's going to happen. So is this one of those things where it doesn't even matter? It's all just political nonsense. It's all political circus. It's all a show. Because if you can do that in one state, why wouldn't you be able to do it in the others? I don't know that you can or can't, but I imagine you can. So if you can do this anyway, this doesn't even matter because the people want him to win. And I'm telling you, if the Supreme Court shuts this guy down and says that he can't be on these ballots, and there is a workaround, he is going to win the presidential election with it. It will actually be a historic win. It'll be so massive over the Democrats because people will see this as the Democrats trying to break down democracy. So at the end of the day,
I think it works against their favor because, it's the same thing with censorship, whether you try to censor a topic or a certain way of thinking. As soon as you start doing that, I start thinking, maybe there's something there I should be interested in.
Right.
Same kind of concept. It's like if you're telling me I can't vote for Trump, maybe I'm thinking that, and I know I don't trust you.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm sitting there going, maybe this is my guy.
Well, look at every time they've tried to do something. Pardon me. Sorry. Every time they've tried to do something to take Trump down, it's only worked in his favor.
Yeah.
Right. And you take your pick. He's always gone up in the polls. And to me, this would be the ultimate one. This would be the biggest thing you can do. And he's gonna find his way through it anyway.
I don't think it's the biggest thing you can do, and I think they might do the biggest thing you can do.
You think they're gonna take him out?
I don't think I wouldn't be confident enough to say they will, but I wouldn't be surprised.
I'll tell you why they will. I'll tell you. Here's my opinion. I actually prefer RFK Jr. to everyone else that's running. I think he's the guy. I think he would do the best job. I think he's actually more libertarian than people would like to admit. I think he's very centered. I think he's the guy. I think he would do the best job. If he got in, I think he might be the next name on the list of Kennedys that's not around anymore. And I hate to say that because I really like him. But here's why.
Would be literally the third.
But here's why. I think that because I actually think that RFK could do a lot of damage inside the organization
Yeah.
and could make America better for a lot of people. And I think they don't want that. But Trump, in my opinion, Trump is so politically inept that they'll just get him in there and just show him something shiny and fucking he'll just keep himself busy for another 4 years. Because they did it already once, they'll do it again.
Yeah.
I think that Trump is not that dangerous to the apparatus. I think RFK Jr. is. So even if he wins, I think, like I said, I think they just baffle him with bullshit for the next 4 years and they find their way through it.
True. All right. Anything else you wanted to add today, brother?
No, that's everything. All right. Thanks for listening. Bye, everybody.